Baker Mayfield will not be playing Saturday night against the Steelers. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen or view every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at @JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, here with you 5 days a week along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. What I am watching for in the Bucs preseason game against the Steelers Saturday night, and who has the most to gain or lose. That is all coming up in a little bit. But on yesterday's show, I talked about the starters that were going to play against the Steelers in Saturday night's preseason game. And Todd Bowles had told the media that Evans and Levante would sit out, but that all other starters should be ready to play. Well, after that recording, Rick Stroud tweeted out, quote, "After reviewing the tape of today's practice, Todd Bowles just told me he believes Baker Mayfield played so well today in the joint workout with the Steelers, he will not play in Saturday night's game," end quote. So now Baker joins Evans and Levante as the starters that absolutely will not play in this game. And look, I talked about it a little bit on yesterday's show, so I'm going to reiterate it again. I do not love this. I don't love the idea of some of the starters, especially the guy at the most important position on the team, getting minimal preseason snaps. And maybe I'm wrong, and Bowles wants to treat the third preseason game as the dress rehearsal, regardless of whether or not they see the Bills later in the season. But at this point, that's what we have to hope for. On my explanation yesterday, I used Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals as an example of teams that generally don't play their starters much, if at all, in the preseason, and that they've gotten off to some really, really slow starts. Here are the week one stats since joining the league for Joe Burrow. Rookie season in 2020, he went 23 of 36 for 193 yards, no touchdowns, one interception. They lose to the Chargers. 2021, 20 of 27 for 261, two touchdowns, zero interceptions, overtime win against the Vikings. Okay, that's solid. 2022, he goes 33 of 53 for 338 yards, two touchdowns, four interceptions in an overtime loss at home to the Steelers. In 2023, he goes 14 of 31 for 82 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. It's a 24-3 loss to the Cleveland Browns. But then in 2024, he goes 21 of 29 for 164, no touchdowns, no interceptions, a 16-10 loss at home to the New England Patriots. In fact, since Joe Burrow joined the Bengals in 2020, they have opened the season with consecutive losses 4 out of 5 seasons. Within the first 2 weeks of the season in each year, Joe Burrow has amassed 14 touchdowns and 9 interceptions with a record of 1-9. His career touchdown to interception ratio is over 3-1 and an overall record of 38-30-1. So these first 2 games every year are well below his career averages. And I know the Bucs are not the Bengals. And I know that Baker is not Joe Burrow. But since I used the Bengals as the example of teams that have slow starts after not playing their starters in the preseason, I wanted to really lay out how things have gone for them. I'm not just picking on them to picking on them. There is a 5-year track record of this not working. Look, the Buccaneers cannot afford to start slow. They just can't. You cannot open the season with back-to-back losses while missing Tristan Wirfs and then expect to bounce back like you did the second half of last year. Not with the schedule that the Bucs have. Where are you going to make up that ground? You start 0-2. Are you about to rattle off 4 straight wins against the Jets, Eagles, on the road against the Seahawks, and then the 49ers? Are you going to win 6 out of your last 7 against the Rams, Cardinals, Saints, Falcons, Panthers, Dolphins, and Panthers again? You're already down worse. You're down Godwin. I don't think that he's playing in the first couple of weeks at this point in time, and your quarterback hasn't taken a live preseason snap yet. We honestly don't know if he will at all. So I understand the value of these joint practices. I understand that you can actually learn more in these joint practices than you can in the preseason games. But you also cannot replicate game speed in practice. You just can't. I don't care what you do. It's never going to happen. So if Bowles is holding off until the final preseason game to put Baker out there, then he should probably play the entire first half or more. Don't put him out there for 2 drives and then call it a day. I don't think it's going to work. I think it's going to create problems week 1 on the road against a divisional opponent that knows you as well or better than any team in the league. And they beat you twice last year with their overpriced, now second string quarterback. So this whole thing just makes me nervous. And we'll see what happens with Buffalo next week, but I hate that Baker isn't getting some snaps in this game. And yes, of course, there is the risk that Baker or any other starter goes down in this game with an injury. And, if they get hurt, the narrative is going to be, we lost our starting so-and-so in a meaningless game, but they're not meaningless. That's the point. They're meaningless to fans because they're meaningless in the standings, but there is legitimate value to these games that correlates to the regular season. Whether that's position battles, rookies getting experience, starters getting themselves ramped up and ready to play actual games, there is value here. It's another reason that I hate that they took away a preseason game in exchange for an extra regular season game. We didn't need a 17th regular season game. Don't sit there and preach to me about player safety while you have Thursday night football, and then you're sending these guys out to play an extra game that was added strictly for the profits of the league and the ownership. So when there was 4 preseason games, every team had the same formula. The first game, starters played the opening drive. Maybe they play 2 drives. Second game, they played the first quarter. Maybe they play a little bit into the second quarter. Third game, that's dress rehearsal. All starters, both teams, were on the field into the third quarter. Fourth game, no starters. It was simple. It was easy. It was understood. And those players were better prepared to start the regular season. Now it's a discombobulated mess where no team treats it the same way. No one knows what to expect for any of these games. And you have teams like the Bengals who dig themselves a hole right from the jump every year because they don't treat the preseason the way that they should. I don't know where to find the information, but I would be really interested to know that since they cut a 4th preseason game out of the schedule in exchange for a 17-game season, I would be interested to know if injuries have increased over the course of the first 2 to 4 weeks of the season compared to when there were 4 preseason games. I'm just curious. If anybody knows how to dig up that information, let me know, because I would love to do a deep dive into that. And maybe I'm overreacting and I'm reading way too much into this. Maybe I'm wrong about how they're going to treat the final preseason game. Last year, Baker only played in the 3rd preseason game. He threw 3 passes and the Bucs started off just fine. But they also had Wirfs and they also had Godwin. But you know what? I guess we're going to find out if this was the right approach or not soon enough, since we're just over 3 weeks away from the regular season kicking off with the Bucs and the Falcons. But before that, we have the Bucs and Steelers playing on Saturday night. So what should we be watching for in that one? That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings, planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center so you can track all your accounts, all your investments, all your spending, all in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're actually building wealth. You don't have to juggle multiple apps anymore. You guys know how that goes. If you have to bounce between a half dozen or more apps, chances are you're going to end up forgetting one and you're going to forget something important. With Monarch Money, you can check your finances, track your spending, plan long-term goals in a one-stop shop. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code Locked On NFL for half off your first year. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Bets. Betting experts Lee Sterling and Kevin Rogers have daily MLB locks and can't miss football futures. Find Locked On Bets on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So what are we watching for in this one? The first time around, there were some things to keep an eye on that I laid out with the rookies, the undrafted guys. Grizzard in his first action as offensive coordinator, having to deal with that chess match, especially when there's no true game planning going on. This time around, it's a little similar, but we're going to get a little bit more specific. Mostly, I'm watching these position battles that are really starting to take shape for a limited number of spots. Tez Johnson is back, and my guess is he's going to be in on the action Saturday night. So the battle between him, Ryan Miller, Rakim Jarrett, Trey Palmer, and Cam Johnson at wide receiver is going to start showing signs of separation. Now, Cam and Palmer are separating themselves in a bad way by not being available. It's not their fault that they're hurt, but neither one of those guys is good enough to hold off the other players without being at practice and playing in games. So is it going to be Tez? Is it going to be Miller? Is it going to be Jarrett that separates themselves from the pack with their performance against the Steelers? It's going to be really hard to make a case for Miller not to make the team if he has another game like he did last week. We still obviously don't know how many receivers the Bucs will keep. We just know which ones are locked in. Evans, Godwin, Ibuka, J-Mac, and then I think Sterling Shepard. After that, they may keep one or two more. I lean towards one because they're going to want additional depth at other spots where they're not already as deep. So Tez has the advantage due to the draft capital, but if he stinks up the place and Miller has another outstanding game, things are going to get really, really murky for that final wide receiver spot. Then you have linebacker where Nick Jackson absolutely stole the show last week. You have Levante Voss, Deion Jones, I think, is a lock to probably be the top backup there. And then you have Anthony Walker, but he's been out all training camp. No clue when or if he's even coming back at this stage. So he's probably not ready to start the season, and you're going to need another linebacker there. Jackson was the only one that really jumped out last week, but you have Antonio Greer, you have John Bullock that are both in the running as well. Was Jackson's performance a fluke, or is he really that good? That's going to be something to really keep an eye on, and it'll be interesting to see who the first linebacker is to come in relief of Voss or Jones. My guess is Nick Jackson's going to get the first crack at that if only one of those guys comes off the field at a time. Then you have cornerback. That's another big one. Dean and McCullum are your starting outside corners. Parrish, I think, is your starter in the slot. Then you have Bryce Hall, Benjamin Morrison on the outside, and then Izzian in the slot as your depth pieces. But who is going to make the plays to be that last one or maybe two guys to make the team? You're already at six corners. So even though Izzian is depth at safety as well, so he's a player the Bulls loves and finds incredible value in. So you may be able to kind of fluctuate a little bit. You could keep 7 corners and 3 safeties. You could keep 6 corners and 4 safeties. It really depends on the team construction and who's providing the value on special teams. But they'll keep maybe 1 more corner. So that would put them at 7. Josh Hayes, he's been around for a while, but he's far from a lock. Tyreek Funderburk is hurt, so he's going to have to work his way back in once he returns from injury. Roman Perotti, who had the pick 6, he's out with injury. They just brought in Javian Farr. Kendall Vildor didn't really help his case much last week. So one of these guys has a chance now to really be a splash player and leapfrog some of these other guys that are missing the game with injury. They have to contribute on special teams too, so maybe that's where they can really shine, but it's an important battle to watch. As I mentioned last week, I think it was in talking about Vildor, you need to make your splashes on special teams, it was Josh Hayes. It was Josh Hayes that I was talking about because he dropped an interception, and a couple of plays later, the Titans scored a touchdown because of that second chance that they got. You can make your splashes on special teams because that's where you're going to be primarily utilized when you're this far down on the depth chart. But they have to trust you to go out there and play the position that you regularly play. So if you have these opportunities on defense and you're not taking advantage of them and somebody else is, the Jason Light, Todd Bowles can sit down and say, you know what, look, Josh Hayes provides incredible value on special teams, but when he's in on defense, he's a liability. We have, just as an example, we have Roman Perotti, who's not as good on special teams, but he is better on defense. So if his number gets called and he's got to go in and take snaps at corner, I would rather have him than Josh Hayes. And I'm not saying that that's the case. I'm just giving you the example there. So special teams is where you're going to have the opportunity to separate yourself. But if it's close, you have to make plays on the side of the ball that you normally play on. Otherwise, you could work your way out of a job. Now, speaking of special teams, that's something I'm definitely going to be interested in seeing. I was not impressed with what we saw last week. Coverage wasn't great. Kick returns were not good. The only bright spots really were Chase McLaughlin and then Garrett Green's punt return. That unit has a lot of work to do. And if you're a bubble guy fighting for a spot on this team, make a play on special teams, especially if you're on the coverage unit. If you're a gunner and you can make a splash play, that is going to help your case tremendously. I can't remember the player's name anymore just because I'm old. But there was a player the Bucs had a few years back where all he did was make plays on the punt unit. He had that Michael Jackson, like smooth criminal lean into the end zone where he saved a ball and the Bucs downed it inside the 1 or the 2 yard line back in the alarm clock number uniform era. For the life of me, I can't remember his name, but he was on the team just because he was that impactful as a gunner on the punt unit. That's a spot the Bucs are going to be looking to fill. Beyond that, there's some players that I'm looking forward to seeing. Of course, Emeka Egbuka. Hopefully he plays a little bit more than he did last week, but we'll take what we can get from him. And then I'm excited about Josh Williams. He returned to practice. I'm guessing he's going to see the field after Owen Wright was basically the only running back the entire second half with just a teeny bit of Sean Tucker sprinkled in. Teddy Bridgewater, of course. Let's see if he still has what it takes and if he's going to overtake Trask like I predicted immediately following the signing. Now, to be fair, I think that hill got a lot steeper for Bridgewater after what we saw from Trask last week. That was the best that I have seen him look at any point since he joined the team, whether it was in person or during a game broadcast, which that's something else that I'm looking forward to. Can Trask look as sharp as he did last week? He's going to get a ton of snaps in the first half. So can he string together back-to-back impressive performances? I hope so. I hope Teddy joining the team got him a little fired up and he's out to prove that he's the guy that the Bucs need to trust if, God forbid, anything happens to Baker, and that he can lead this team up and down the field. Then the last one is whether or not any of the safeties are going to step up after J.J. Roberts went down to injury on Thursday. Rashad Wisdom, Shiloh Sanders, Kayvon Merriweather. There's an opening now after Roberts was looking like a player that might have worked his way onto the roster if he had continued on this trajectory. So can any of those guys pick up the slack and get themselves noticed with their play on defense as well as special teams? That's going to be interesting to see unfold. And I mean, safety isn't a position that's guaranteed to have a lot of depth. I just mentioned they might keep 3 on the roster since Izien is someone that can offer depth at 3 different spots: inside corner, outside corner, and safety. So these other guys are likely fighting for one spot. Who has the most to gain and lose? That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of the year. NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football season is back in full swing. This year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. I am playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran like me making your millionth league. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout August. To kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's one team left standing. With the season around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, you can still play in head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. Wrapping things up here on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, and I got a question from Insider Mike, who asked, what one player other than Braswell do you believe has the most to lose or gain or to prove in this upcoming game? And if that person does not at least meet expectations, how far does he get pushed down the depth chart? Great question, Mike. And this plays a little into what I was just talking about as far as what I'm watching for in this game. Now, I love that you excluded Braswell because I'm for sure going to be watching him, though I'm not sure I would have chosen him for this question because I don't think he can really lose much in terms of his spot, just because there really isn't anyone else there that's pushing him or competing with him for that fourth edge rusher in the rotation. Maybe Marquise Watts or Jose Ramirez, but I think at this point, those two are what they are, and they are not going to supplant Braswell or his spot. So instead of one player, I'm going to give you one player on each side of the ball. On offense, it's Rakim Jarrett. He had a very subpar performance last week, and now with Tez Johnson back in the fold, he's really going to have to step it up. As I mentioned, these guys are likely fighting over one roster spot, and as it stands now, we're likely looking at a 3-player race between Jarrett, Tez, and Miller. So if Jarrett gets another opportunity as a return man, it needs to go a heck of a lot better than it did last week. And then in the receiving game, I have got to see much more than what he showed against the Titans, especially when he was out there against the Titans' second, third, fourth string guys. Now, he's certainly not out of the running by any means. He had some impressive play last season when he was called upon, and we have not seen what Tez is capable of on an NFL field. So this is still a pretty open competition. I just think that with as much hype as Jarrett got during the offseason mixed with the limited sample size that we got last year, we just need a little bit more if he's going to take the spot of a player the Bucs just invested draft capital on that projects to be a weapon on both special teams and in the offense. And by weapon, I don't just mean as a receiver. This is a guy that can line up in the backfield. He can line up, in a lot of different spots for this offense that Grizz can really take advantage of these mismatches just to find a way to get him the ball in space and let him do his thing. Defensively, I'm looking at Shiloh Sanders. I think he has some real skill. I was talking to one of the other insiders about this the other day. His big disadvantage is the position that he plays and the defense that he plays in. Now, the Bucs, again, they may only keep 3 safeties on the roster, so there's a lack of opportunity there. On top of that, we know that corner and safety are the 2 most difficult positions to learn in Todd Bowles' defense because he asks so much of those guys in his secondary. So learning all the different responsibilities that he has to take on, with all the different looks, all the different schemes that Bowles cooks up, that's a lot for anyone, but especially for an undrafted rookie that is not coming from a defense anywhere close to as complicated as what Todd Bowles does. Now, he's had some solid plays in camp. He had a nice blitz, last week where he got pressure and a big hit on Boyle against the Titans. And then in joint practice on Thursday, he gave up a touchdown to Pat Freiermuth, but his coverage was outstanding. Freiermuth just made an even more impressive one-handed catch. So there was nothing else Sanders could have done in that situation. The coverage was great. The catch was just better. So I'd like to see him get a little more playing time in this one than we saw last week. And I'd like to see him get more opportunities to play in man coverage. I don't remember seeing much of that from him last week. A lot of times he was dropping back in zone. And if he's going to be on the team, and for some reason he does get sent out onto the field in a regular season game, man coverage is something that he's going to have to do on more than just a few occasions. We've seen Antoine line up in man coverage, Izzy in when he was back there, Jordan Whitehead, Mike Edwards, Tyke Smith, all these guys that lined up at safety last year have had to play man coverage multiple times in one game. So with JJ Roberts out now, he can make a really big leap heading into next week and the final preseason game. If he doesn't make that leap, he's basically going to wind up where he is now. There's not going to be a massive drop in the depth chart. And, where he is right now is someone that I currently have projected to be on the practice squad. The problem is that in order to be on the practice squad, the Bucs are going to have to cut him first. And then another team might be willing to scoop him up as a waiver claim. Even if they don't, and he makes it through waivers and the Bucs are able to place him on the practice squad, he can get taken off that squad at any moment as long as the team that claims him puts him on their active roster immediately. I'm sure there's more than a couple of teams out there that would want to do that or want to give him the opportunity because they don't like what they're seeing out of their last line of defense throughout camp and preseason. But I also think that there are other players that the Bucs will try to stash that would get picked off first. Guys like Trey Palmer or Ryan Miller, if they don't make the 53-man roster, or you have Owen Wright or Josh Williams. Owen Wright was pretty impressive. He was a guy, that I was a little critical of at the start of his play last week, but he's one of those guys, as I talked about on the reaction show, that he got better with every carry. Maybe that's just the style of running back he is. But then, if Wright or Williams have a big game again this Saturday and they do it again against the Bills, and the Bucs only carry 3 running backs, those are guys that other teams might legitimately be interested in. Warren Peoples is a guy that flashed last week. If that continues, he could start to draw some eyeballs. So I think the offense is pretty close to set. There aren't a lot of guys that can really rise or fall, but defensively, this is the chance for Shiloh to really take an advantage of an opportunity to show out and show that he's really got a grasp on the defense and make his case to be one of these guys in the secondary that can help the team. That's going to do it for this episode. We will be back tomorrow live after the game for an immediate reaction and takeaway episode to the preseason game. The insiders texted, the YouTube comments we're talking. I got DMs on Twitter. You guys want to go live? You know what? It's preseason for me too. Probably a good idea to go through a live or two before we hit the regular season and work out any of the kinks there. So we will be live after the game against the Steelers, which means you got to make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube with those notifications turned on so that you get notified as soon as I'm live. You can jump in the live chat and we can really have a lot of fun. Make sure you're following everything on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. Subscribe on YouTube with the notifications turned on, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. Become an insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. If you want to support the show, but you don't want to be an insider, it's real easy. Like this episode on YouTube, leave a 5-star review wherever you get podcasts. It does help other Buccaneers fans find the show. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.